Miles Harrington has flown from New York to London for a brief Home Office consult and a guest lecture at King's College when Scotland Yard calls at 12:07 a.m. A pirate signal hijacks the city's airwaves each midnight, a woman calmly reading numbers before a chilling sign-off. Extinguishers are lit. Bodies staged beneath dead street lamps pull Miles into a ritual threaded through London's forgotten Lamplighter routes and toward a killer who treats the city like a clock. The Lamplighter's broadcast. Chapter 1. The Call from the Yard. Miles Harrington had flown in from New York to London 3 days earlier for a short consultancy with the Home Office and a guest lecture at King's College. He was laying low in a modest Holborn sublet, telling himself a week in London might pass for rest between cases. Jet lag had other plans. The telephone rang at 12:07 a.m., a small insistent sound against a night rinsed clean by rain. Miles Harrington lay awake anyway, listening to the city's after-hours choir tires whispering along wet tarmac, a fox's laugh in an alley, bass thudding through brick from some hidden warehouse venue. He reached for the receiver. "Mr. Harrington?" The woman's voice was clipped steady. "D.I. Ruxana Malik, Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard requests your assistance." He swung his legs to the floor, already reaching for the lamp. Requests from the Yard tended not to be optional. "What kind of assistance?" "Unsolved," she said. 3 victims in 8 weeks, same staging, same calling card." A beat. "There's also a tape at each scene, a woman's voice reading numbers, broadcast at midnight." Miles's attention sharpened. Number stations had a way of turning grown men into moths. "Where are you?" "Bow Tower Block Roof. We can brief on site." By 1 o'clock he was threading through rain-slicked estate walkways, sodium lamps painting the puddles amber. The roof access door yawned open under bright scene lights. Police tape shivered in the night wind. An aerial farm bristled along the parapet like steel reeds. D.I. Ruxana Malik waited by a dead lamp whose neck had been snapped years ago. She offered a hand. Up close she looked like a long week compressed into a neat bun and a dry coat. "Mr. Harrington." "Thank you." He nodded to the forensics officer bagging evidence. The body had already been removed, but the place held the shape of it, scuffed dust, a dark bloom where the rain couldn't quite wash away, footprints that led in, not out. At the base of the broken lamp, someone had arranged a dozen wooden matches into the figure of an old lamplighter, a tiny stick man with a pole on his shoulder, mid-stride. "Victim?" Miles asked. "Reuben Costa, 31, volunteer caretaker, found by a resident who came up to smoke." Malik gestured to an evidence bag. "And this, TDK 90-minute cassette, handwritten label 0000. Miles studied the tape through plastic. Rain had made the ink bleed spider legs off the zeros. "You listened?" "We made a dub." Malik's voice thinned in the wind. "A woman reads 5 number groups for about a minute, then static. Then she says, 'Extinguishers are lit.' Same pattern on all 3 tapes. Our analysts think the broadcast hijacks a pirate station at midnight, cuts across for 60 seconds, vanishes." He let his gaze travel the roofline. Satellite dishes canted like moons, a tangle of guy lines, puddles stippled by new rain. The estates beyond sprawled in low orange hum, their lamps tired and uneven. "Victims share anything?" Malik gave a minute shake of her head. "First was hospital IT. Second, freelance photographer. Now a caretaker. No common habits, debts, or acquaintances. Only the staging, dead street lamp overhead, matches arranged like that figure, and the tape." A constable appeared at the door to the stairwell. "Inspector, the resident's ready." They took the interview 1 floor down in a corridor smelling of damp coats and cigarette smoke. The woman wrapped both hands around a mug, purple dressing gown cinched tight. She hadn't seen faces. She'd heard the roof door slam and the run of rubber soles. "But the radio I did hear," she said. "We get pirates up here all the time." Just before 12, a woman's voice, clear as a dentist's, 12497, then a gap, then more. At the end she said, "Extinguishers are lit." Odd thing to say. "Odd," Malik said, making a note. Back on the roof, the wind pressed cold fingers through Miles's coat. The broken lamp rose beside him like a throat that had forgotten light. He turned the cassette's bag in his hands, frowning slightly at its weight, its nothingness. Rooftops, pirate hijacks, a ritual object. This city always found new ways to talk to itself. "If someone's stealing a minute at midnight," he said, "someone knows which roof their aerial sits on." Malik's mouth tightened into something like a smile. "You know the pirate crowd?" "I know listeners," he said, "and the people who build the things listeners need." "What do you need from us?" "A clean dub of each tape, transcripts, and a map of scenes." He glanced at the skyline where cranes stood like halted metronomes. "Also a contact at the radio communications agency who still answers the phone after dark." "It's the 90s, she said. "He'll be home, I'll wake him." Miles slid his notebook into his inside pocket and turned once more toward the dead lamp, toward the stickman of matches at its base, toward the glimmering city that insisted on speaking even when it had nothing to say. The rain eased. Somewhere below, a radio LED glowed to life, obedient to an hour, waiting for a voice to come and claim it. "Let's find the transmitter," he said. "And the hands that light the matches," Malik replied. They rode the lift in a hush, broken only by the flicker of tired tube light and the soft crinkle of the evidence bag in Malik's grip. On the way out, Miles looked up along the tower's ribbed facade to the roof he had just left. As if on cue, far off, a different roof pulsed with the faint beat of bass. The city never slept. It only changed stations. Chapter 2. Signals and Suspects. By late morning, London wore the crisp brightness that arrives after a night wrung dry. D.I. Malik commandeered a broom-covered conference room at the station and produced tea the colour of old pennies. Miles produced a name. "Elsie Hargreaves," he said. "Retired GCHQ, runs a shortwave club in Hackney. If anyone can tell us whether a ghost lives in that tape, it's her." Elsie's terraced house greeted them with the warm tin smell of solder and the Sunday morning comfort of marmalade. Radios massed on shelves like well-fed cats. Enamel mugs stood in precise, cosy disorder. She fit padded headphones over tidy grey hair, nodded for the dub and let the woman's voice fill the room. 12497, 80316. A pause. The faint click of a splice. More numbers, uninflected and antiseptic, as if the reader had never met a noun. A minute later, a hiss, the gentle collapse of signal, and the almost courteous coda, "Extinguishers are lit." Elsie lifted the headphones and smiled with a listener's private joy. "Number stations," she said. "Only not shortwave, that's VHF. Your mischief is local, our beloved pirates." "Hijacking at midnight," Malik said. "A minute here, a minute there." Elsie tapped the desk. "You climb a tower, borrow a frequency from boys flogging dub plates at 2 in the morning, slip your whisper in while everyone dances. The voice is human through a cheap vocoder to hear that tremble. Tape, not studio, and listen to the echo, a hard surface close by. Rooftop, stairwell." Miles watched the VU meters breathe. "What about the phrase at the end?" "Someone's a poet," Elsie said. "Lamplighters once walked this city with poles and flames. Extinguishers are lit says, the old rites continue. Or, your lamps die on schedule." Her eyes twinkled. "Poets and murderers both prefer ceremony." Back outside, prams and vans were already arguing for precedence in the street. Malik flicked a glance at her watch. "Next?" "A record shop in Camden," Miles said. "Lighthouse, the name's either coincidence or a joke the city's telling. Colin Price owns it. He'll know who keeps Rooftops humming." Lighthouse was a cave of vinyl and whirring turntables, dust motes spinning like lost planets under fluorescent tubes. Flyers taped to the counter promised Rooftop Rush and Last Train Home. Colin Price looked up from a sleeve with the thin, defensive poise of a man who survives, by reading the room before the room reads him. Malik showed her warrant card without flourish. "We're not here about tax," she said, which made Colin's shoulders drop half an inch. "We're here about a minute at midnight." "The numbers, lady," Colin said too quickly. "Everyone's heard it's just a laugh." "Nothing about 3 dead men is a laugh," Malik replied. He scratched beneath a wristband until his skin flared. "I don't know nothing about lamps." "But you do know aerials," Miles said, letting his gaze drift over the flyers. He noticed a corner where a phone number labeled Rig Builder had been neatly torn away. "East Side. Reliable access. Rooftops you can get to twice in a month." "Rooftops move," Colin said, eyes skittering. "You never go back." "Unless you need the view for the performance," Miles said mildly. The man's glance flinched to the torn corner again, then away, chased by fear. "I'm not putting my head in that door, those boys. They don't play." "Our killer doesn't either," Malik said, softer. "If the voice is stitched through a vocoder, it could be anyone, but the minute at midnight requires hands." Colin swallowed once. "You didn't get that number here," he muttered, and looked down as if his own counter might testify against him. They left a card. Outside, traffic clawed down the street in a light, ragged snarl. "He'll call when his fear changes shape," Miles said. "For now, one more. King's College, Dr. Adrian Vale." Vale had the well-scrubbed charm of a lecturer who enjoyed whiteboards and television panels. His jumper had a hole at the cuff, which made his smile seem less rehearsed. He listened to the tape in an office that looked onto the Thames like a stoic friend. "Delicious," he said, folding his hands. "If it's a true one-time pad, your digits are uncrackable without the key, but the pattern 5-figure groups read for 60 seconds, then a flourish tells you this person considers the broadcast a stage. He wants an audience." "He?" Malik asked. "A habit of speech," Vale said, unbothered. "Your lamplighter could be anyone. Bring me accurate transcripts and precise times. I'll at least tell you if your poet prefers prime numbers to pretty ones." Miles watched the reflection of river light tremble under the office ceiling. Helpful, he thought, noting the careful modesty, the practiced appetite. Helpful sometimes came with hobbies. On the Strand, buses growled past in red double-decker beats. The afternoon had tilted toward evening. The city, as always, was tuning itself toward midnight. Malik tucked the cassette dub back into her bag, as if it were a sullen animal that might try to bite. "We have a pattern," she said. "Rooftops, a hijacked minute. A phrase like a lit match and victims under dead lamps." Miles's gaze climbed the stone shoulders of Somerset House, then out across the river, where cranes stalled like punctuation marks in a sentence too long to finish. "We also have a city full of aerials and men who love secrets," he said. "We'll need a better map." They moved with the tide of people along the pavement. Somewhere above the roofs, an invisible net of signal thrummed, indifferent to grief. Somewhere below them, under the pavements and pipes, darkness waited with its routines. At midnight, a voice would appear, polite as a librarian counting in 5s. Miles imagined the tiny figure of matches laid down again at some other extinguished lamp, and felt the case turning, not opening but choosing its hinge. "Let's make the minute ours before he does," he said. Malik nodded, face set, already calculating calls to make and doors to knock. The Thames dragged itself east, old as any ritual, toward Greenwich, where the city kept time when it wasn't losing it. Chapter 3. Grid Shadows. By afternoon, maps covered the conference table like overlapping skins. Miles stood with a pencil in hand, while D.I. Malik's team pinned acetate sheets over street plans and estate schematics. 3 red dots marked the murder scenes. A 4th circle hung in pencil, where Elsie suspected the hijack had been strongest the previous night. "Ordnance survey grid," Miles murmured, aligning a clear ruler. "If the numbers groups are a cipher, they might be pointing to squares rather than words." Malik leaned in, the faint citrus of her hand soap cutting through the stale room. "Show me." He wrote out the first broadcast as they'd transcribed it. 5-digit clusters stepped down the page. Beside each, he penciled a pair of letters and numbers, TQ-33, TQ-34 ghosting through muscle memory from old walks across the city. If you discard every third digit and treat the rest as eastings and northings, you can coerce a set of TQ references. Coerce, Malik repeated, skeptical but interested. You're making the puzzle fit. Perhaps, Miles said. But look! He laid a second acetate with the old gas lamp roots Elsie had fetched from the library's archives, a faint web of 19th-century maintenance paths where men once walked at dusk with poles and fire. The three murders sat like pins on a moth's wing along a single historical route, long since paved over and electrified. Between the second and third, a gap yawned across two estates. If he's following the old route, Malik said, we should see a fourth where. Miles slid his ruler to a point where the historic path bent under a railway arch and climbed toward a municipal park. Here, a row of lamps was decommissioned in the 70s, never fully replaced. The route bends for a school. Tonight's broadcast could mark it. A young detective pushed in with a printout. Sir, another dub came in from a community station in Deptford. They caught last night's minute cleaner than we did. The closing phrase changed. Miles took the sheet. The numbers were similar, but the coda read, "The keeper drops his flame." Keeper, Malik said softly, as in Lamplighter. Or caretaker, Miles said, thinking of Reuben Costa and his logged requests for dead bulbs. He picks men whose lives touch light. They split the evening in two. Malik sent uniforms to canvass the estates along the old route, to bribe caretakers with tea and get them to walk their rooftops once before dark. Miles collected Elsie and drove the roads in a borrowed unmarked car with a portable scanner chattering on the passenger seat. The city moved through its own rituals. Children hauled in from puddles, shutters rolled up for the night trade, commuters drifting like shoals. Men think radios make them invisible, Elsie said, face lit by the scanner's green digits. They forget radios are only voices with long legs. They parked near the municipal park and walked the boundary, boots crunching cinders. A line of post-war lamps leaned at defeated angles, their heads capped with dull, yellowed acrylic. Across the grass, an estate's tallest block punched up into cloud. Rooftop, Miles said, following the line between dead lamp and vantage point. The lift smelled like old chips and wet wool. On the top landing, the wind shoved at the fire door as if it were a friend late to a party. They stepped onto the roof into a high electric dusk. Puddles fractured the sky, cables spiderwebbed toward aerials. Miles felt the city's breath more keenly up here, the way it changed temperature over brick and river. He moved toward the parapet and froze. There, at the base of a street lamp whose wiring had long since been cut, lay a small figure made of matches, pole on shoulder, mid-stride. Fresh. The wind had not yet scattered the delicate pose. Beside it, a TDK cassette in a clear bag sat like a bland plastic thought. Elsie's hand found his sleeve. He's early tonight. Miles crouched, careful not to step on the figure. Or we're late. He scanned the roofline for footprints, scuffs, any sign of where a body might have lain, but the scene felt unconsummated. A staging without its actor. He peered over the parapet. Below, the park lay quiet. A dog pulling a man toward a hedge with comic urgency. No officers, no cordon. A sudden crackle popped from the scanner. An illegal station, mid-set, dropped to a hiss, and a woman's voice arrived, as if she'd been waiting behind a curtain. 42895. Miles straightened, heart slipping a gear, and lifted the scanner to his ear. 61330944481. A clean measured minute. Then the keeper drops his flame. Silence. The pirate set slammed back, the base as jarring as a door kicked open. Elsie's eyes shone, half fear, half delight. It's live and close. Miles walked the roof, trying to feel the echo that had given away stairwells and hard surfaces in Elsie's sitting room. At the far corner, a metal service hut squatted, its padlock bright from recent handling. He touched it. Warm. Malik, he said into his mobile, we've got a fresh staging on Albion House's roof. No body. Tape present. Broadcast just hit live. Clear as a bell. Send a car. We're going to look for a transmitter. He and Elsie edged along the parapet, eyes picking out cables in the gloaming. From the service hut, a thin coax snaked to the lip and danced downward like an obedient snake. Miles peered over. The cable hugged brick until it reached the 4th floor, then arced out over open air to the roof of the adjacent community center. "Clever," Elsie said. "Keep your signal here, your arrest elsewhere." They took the stairs 2 at a time, cut across the courtyard, and found the community center door chained but lax. Inside, a dark corridor smelled of floor wax and children's poster paint. At the end, up a maintenance ladder, they shouldered onto a lower roof where a whip antenna swayed like a slender metronome. Her portable transmitter hummed in a plastic crate. On its side, in neat black marker, "Lamplighter 2." Miles crouched, watching the power LED blink as it fell to stillness. Whoever had set it hadn't had time to coil the spare coax. It lay in a lazy question mark. He felt the answer forming. Someone had staged the ritual, flung the numbers through the air, and dashed back across a gap none of them had yet seen. The city gathered its breath for night. Somewhere not far from here, a man moved with matches in his pocket. Chapter 4. Rooftop Sting. They held the roof through twilight. Malik's car rolled up with blues silenced, and 2 uniforms took the perimeter, while a third strung a line from the community center roof to the estates. "You're sure he'll come back?" she asked, peering at the tidy transmitter. "He left it hot," Miles said. "Either he's sloppy or he's swift. If he's swift, he'll return to pull the plug before anyone notices the footprint in the air." They killed all lights. The estate dozed unevenly. A television's blew in one window, an argument in another, a child's thin cry migrating from room to room like a restless bird. Their breath made small clouds. Elsie adjusted her scarf, eyes on the whip. At 11:57 the scanner burred. A pirate DJ hollered about an afters in Hackney Wick. A laugh skittered across the band. At 11:59:58 silence fell, as if the night had blinked. Numbers began. 7093115586. Miles watched the transmitter's LED pulse, a heartbeat counting backwards. Malik's hand hovered over her radio, waiting. At 00103, the door to the service hut on Albion House's roof swung inward, a shadowy wedge against the dimmer dark. A figure in a black balaclava slipped out, moving with the practical grace of someone good at heights. He knelt at the base of the dead lamp. A pale flicker of fingers, a small movement like arranging a doll. Then he turned. "Go," Malik breathed. 2 uniforms went first, boots convinced to silence by training and adrenaline. Miles followed the line across the strung rope, feeling it hum under his palms. On the far side, the runner startled at some sense older than sight and sprang for the parapet. Malik shouted, "Police!" and the estate woke in 100 gasps. The runner took the drop to the utility roof with a confidence that made violence look like choreography. He landed, rolled, and was up, a cat planning its next fence. Miles hit the roof 10 yards behind as a baton clattered across gravel and a uniform swore. The runner skidded on a slick patch, corrected in a flicker, then darted toward the maintenance ladder that would bleed them all into the night. "Stop!" Malik's voice rang like something hammered. The runner looked back, once the only glimpse, a pair of eyes in a slash of wool, steady, cool, the regard a worker gives a machine he built himself. He dropped through the hatch, boots thudding down the ladder rungs. By the time Miles shouldered through, the corridor offered nothing but its own echo. They chased him through a maze of doors. Somewhere a caretaker's office door stood ajar. Malik barreled through and came up against chain link, a rear exit. Fresh scuff on concrete. Beyond, an alley led to the street like a mouth to light. A car coughed and caught. Tires hissed through puddles. By the time they reached pavement, the tail lights were gone, smears in rain. Back upstairs, the ritual sat where he'd left it. A new match figure under the dead lamp, pole stiff on shoulder, the posture jaunty as if the stickman whistled at his work. Beside the figure lay a Polaroid. The photo had developed to a lamplighter stencil, sprayed on some blank wall Victorian hat, pole like a spear, but the black paint had run as if the wall had bled. Malik held the photo by its edges. He wants us to see the persona. The lamplighter is a character, or a mask anyone can wear, Miles said. He crouched by the figure, noting subtle differences, the angle of the matchman's head, the length of the match used for a leg. This one's left leg is longer than last night's, a different hand. Elsie peered, or the same hand trying on something else. They bagged the transmitter and the photo. Downstairs, the caretaker grey cardigan, permanent tired, stared at the officers in his office as if they were children needing juice. "We've had the roof door jimmied twice this month," he said when Malik asked. "Kids, I thought, maybe your man leaves it tidy." "Alarms?" Malik asked. "On paper," he said, which was the same as Noe. On the street, Colin Price hovered on the far curb, not quite approaching. The record shop owner looked thin as the rain. He clocked the uniforms, clocked Malik with a cop's posture, and made a decision to brave it. "I didn't tell you nothing," he said, voice a thread. "But if I don't say this, someone else gets it instead." He nodded toward a stack of damp flyers under his coat. "They've been paying rig builders to set up Jump Kit's 2 roof setups for a minute-long hijack. Caches near parks and schools. One of the builders drinks at the Prince of Wales on the Old Kent Road. He's called Ash. He won't talk to you. He might talk to me if you're in the gents." "Why tell us?" Malik asked. Colin scratched at his wristband. "Because someone pressed my bones when I was 16, and I never walked quite right again," he said, almost conversationally. "I don't fancy watching more lads put under lamps for spectacle." Miles met Malik's eye. They had the photo of a mask, a transmitter labelled with a persona, and now a bar with a name. "Tomorrow," Malik said to Colin, quiet as a pact. "No heroics." He nodded and walked away, shoulders tight against an invisible hand. Chapter 5. The AZ Microdots. Morning found Miles back at Elsie's, because puzzles often like tea. The Polaroid lay on her workbench beside a magnifier. The transmitter sat disassembled in tidy organs. The marker Lamplighter 2 had been written with a steady hand and a decent pen. "The crystal's off the shelf," Elsie said, tapping the guts with a screwdriver. "But whoever built it likes order. Good solder joints, no show." Miles turned the Polaroid under the lamp. The stencil lamplighter had been sprayed on peeling white paint, maybe a substation wall, maybe a service corridor. Beneath the figure, a line of numbers had been tagged in a thin, nervous hand. 559 EU ZO 613 9481. He recognized the last 2 clusters from the broadcast. "Could be a fan copy," Elsie said, "or a message to the faithful. The trouble with masks is everyone wants one." He flipped open a dog-eared London AZ he'd carried since his first case in the city. The pages had softened like cloth. For no reason he could name, he held a page over the angle poise and squinted. Something winked near the gutterer fleck, like dust that refused to behave. "Elsie," he said, "do you have a jeweler's loupe?" She did, because of course she did. Under magnification, the fleck became a perfect microdot, the kind of thing Miles had last seen in a museum about espionage. He turned 3 more pages, then 5. Each 5th page had a dot, tucked into a corner where only thumbs went. Elsie whistled through her teeth. "Oh, you wicked old bird. Someone's been hiding references in the AZ. That's practically a love note to my generation." They worked in a fugue of quiet industry, marking each dot with a post-it, then gently lifting it with a sliver of tape to fix on white card. Under higher magnification, numbers and letters blooming like bacteria. TQ 3598112, 120291. TQ 367804, 1400291. A sequence of grid references paired with dates, all clustered in February 1991. "Not murders," Miles said. "Nothing in the files about a February spree. Elsie rifled through a stack of clipped articles like a magician choosing the right card. Here, a warehouse collapse in 91, south of the River Illicit Party, mezzanine gave way, 4 dead. There was an inquiry, arguments about safety codes, about who signed what. Miles took the article. A name stitched itself to the day's fabric, South Dock Warehouse. He looked at the grid references again, aligning them by habit. They formed a path across a swathe of derelict riverfront that had, in the last 3 years, been reborn into glass and steel. Lamplighter walks the old gas routes, he murmured, but the microdots walk the river. Elsie poured more tea, the domestic act almost comically tender against the hard edges of the puzzle. "You'll want a copy of the inquest records," she said, "because if these are hearing dates and site inspections, your man's telling a story about extinction. Old lamps out, old buildings razed, light put up where light didn't belong." D.I. Malik's call came mid-thought. "We have a meeting with a man called Ash," she said. "Old Kent Road, Prince of Wales. Colin will make the introduction in the gents, which is a sentence I didn't think I'd say before noon." The pub was long, brown and honest. Men occupied the bar as if they'd been poured there years ago and were now part of the varnish. Colin kept his eyes on his pint like a penitent. He disappeared toward the toilets. Minutes later, Malik's radio clicked once, their prearranged signal. In the gents, a man with a face like a fist curated by life stood washing oil from his hands. Ash looked at them in the mirror and decided who they were, or at least what they weren't. "So you cops?" he asked. "We're the people between a lot of boys and a long drop," Malik said. "We don't care who sold what to whom, we care about a minute at midnight." Ash grunted. "You're late to it. Someone's been hiring jump kits. 2 roofs, 1 minute, cash. I don't ask." "How do they brief?" Miles asked. "A voice? Notes?" "Type notes, a P.O. box, cash in envelopes with drawings, stencils of a lamplighter. Cute." He shut off the tap with a slap. "They ask for dead lamps nearby. They want sight lines. They want ladders left out, but it's not me leaves 'em." "Where do you buy your crystals?" Miles asked. Ash eyed him, then shrugged. "Ham radio shop by Waterloo. Bloke knows me by my moan. Why?" "Because someone who likes order and pens that don't blot also likes buying parts in person," Miles said. "And because I enjoy a walk." "Enjoy this," Ash said, fishing in his pocket and sliding over a thin paper. It was a receipt for a P.O. box at a Bermondsey sorting office. No name, just a number and a due date. Today. They split again. Malik took the receipt and a team to the sorting office with a warrant that might stiffen under scrutiny. Miles went to Waterloo with Elsie, whose ability to look like a twinkly grandmother at a radio shop counted as tradecraft. The shop smelled of cardboard and the past. Glass cases glittered with connectors, switches, crystals in tiny envelopes. A man with nicotine fingers looked up without curiosity. "Help you?" Elsie fluttered. "A crystal for my young friend," she said, gesture vague enough to mean any young man, including Miles. The proprietor named prices. Miles asked about bulk orders, about a customer who bought 2 at a time, always in the same range, every Thursday. The man lifted an eyebrow. "We keep no tabs," he said, lie and truth braided. Miles saw it then, a receipt spike by the till, fat with paper. The slip atop showed a purchase of 2 crystals in the lamplighter's frequency, dated the afternoon before the second murder, paid cash. The signature field was blank, but a note scribbled at the bottom read, "For Vale Hold." He felt the click of a gear catching. "You know Dr. Adrian Vale?" he asked mildly. The proprietor squinted. "Does Telly him? Came in asking clever questions the other week. We like clever questions." "Don't we all?" Elsie said sweetly. Out on the pavement, the sky had turned the color of old sheets. Miles stood very still for a breath that lasted too long. Helpful often had hobbies. Perhaps one of those hobbies included radios. Chapter 6. Fall of a Promoter. The Bermondsey sorting office yielded little. The P.O. box had been cleared at 9 that morning by a man in a cap who offered the camera no face. But the inquest records from 1991 began to paint the faint outline of a motive. 4 dead at South Dock Warehouse, mezzanine unpermitted, safety signs absent or locked in a cupboard. A city shrugging itself from old work into new money, and men caught under beams when the shrug went wrong. Follow the names, Malik said, dropping a stack of photocopies onto her desk. Promoters, owners, signatories, anyone who argued about light and exits. The night's weather grew crisp and theatrical, lending the city edges. They met at a warehouse-turned-club south of the river, where a promoter named Maxi Nunes held court, like a man who'd learned charm as survival. He wore a blazer with a carnation and sold the idea that every night could be the last one anyone needed. "I signed for safety," he told Miles with smooth hands, standing under a string of fairy lights that made his wince seem festive. "I attend to extinguishers." "Extinguishers," Miles repeated, alert. "Plural." Maxie laughed too quickly. "You know how it is, paperwork, words." At 1:08 a.m., a call came over Malik's radio from a patrol on the riverfront. A body by a dead lamp under a railway arch, a lamplighter of matches arranged at its feet. They reached the arch to find Maxi Nunes posed as if taking a bow, pupils filmed grey by the dark. In his pocket, a cassette labelled 000. On the arch wall, sprayed in thin black paint, the lamplighter stencil again. The paint run in teardrops. Miles crouched. Maxi's blazer had lost its carnation somewhere between the club and the arch. In his other pocket, a folded photocopy of a 1991 safety memo citing Adrian Vale Consulting among a list of expert witnesses who'd briefed the inquest on crowd flow and lighting plans. "Vale," Malik said, low enough to be only air, "your lecturer likes committees." "Committees like men who sound sure," Miles said, feeling something tilt inside the case, not a revelation, only gravity asserting itself. But lecturers also like proximity to action. He could simply be a man with too much curiosity. The hijack minute had rolled across the scanner while they drove, a woman's voice counting through 5-number groups, then a new coda, "Timekeepers, advance." "Greenwich," Elsie said when they pooled notes at dawn. "Timekeepers live at the Meridian. Your poet wants a procession." Malik spread the inquest pages. Maxi's name appears in the 91 transcripts as a witness. He organized the party 2 weeks before the collapse, says he warned the owners about the mezzanine. The owners say he loved the crowd more than the limits. "Extinguishers are lit," Miles murmured, hearing the phrase as a perversion of safety's language. "He speaks in codes of light and timing and ceremony. He kills under dead lamps, leaves numbers as if they were prayers." Elsie pinched the bridge of her nose. "There's a kind of man who believes the city is an instrument, and other people are notes." Miles thought of Dr. Vale's dry hand, of the way his eyes had liked the river, of the way his jumper's cuff had been worn not by poverty, but by absent-mindedness. He thought of the receipt spike with "for Vale hold," and felt a caution that felt like hunger's quieter cousin. "Let's not marry a theory," he said, "but let's invite it home to meet the family." They drafted a plan. Pull Vale's consultancy filings around 1990-92. Map the grid references from the microdots against inquest site visits. Watchlist the ham shop and the P.O. box. Put eyes on the jump kit rooftops near the historical Lamplighter route. Colin Price, softer-faced now that he'd chosen a side, offered to float word among rig builders that the Lamplighter persona had become irresistible bait. "Someone will try to wear the mask," he said. "If your man's running a decoy system, he'll let them. Then he'll clear them from the stage." At dusk, a call came from a pirate DJ whose station they'd spoken to through a proxy. He'd received a cassette by courier unmarked, except for a neat label. 0020, Lamplighter, live. The instructions inside were typed. "Play at midnight, 1 minute. Set gain to this mark." The courier had been a kid on a bicycle with headphones and no interest in police. "Where?" Malik asked. "Deptford," the DJ said, bravado cracking to reveal a boy. "But don't bring the circus, I've got enough heat." Miles glanced at the clock. 2 hours to midnight. The city's day version folded itself away. The night crew raised the set. "We take the minute," Malik said. "We make it ours." They went out into the cold with a radio that had long legs, and a city that loved ceremony, toward a voice that counted in fives and a lamplighter who walked where light forgot to go. Chapter 7. The False Lamplighter. The pirate DJ in Deptford had hands like birds quick, nervous, always landing on the wrong knob and pretending it was the right one. He'd set the minute to trigger from a cassette deck with a taped-on mark that read, "Gain here," and a grease-penciled arrow. The note inside the jiffy bag was typed and without a signature. Play at 00 exactly. "Do not speak." A second line, fainter, read, "Silence is part of the ceremony." Miles watched from the far corner with D.I. Malik, while the station's shabby studio filled with coil heat and breath. Outside, rain ticked on corrugated roof like an impatient queue. At 23:59:58, the DJ curled his fingers away from the mic, the way a man might hold his breath before a dive. The tape rolled. A woman's voice arrived, crisp as hard frost. 43982161159. At exactly a minute, the voice said, "Timekeepers, advance." And the DJ exhaled so loudly he heard his own fear on air. He hit stop. The studio did nothing, which was somehow worse than chaos. "Who delivered it?" Malik asked. "Kid on a bike," the DJ said. "Tiny lad. Headphones, hood up, didn't care if I was the queen. You cops going to arrest me?" Miles said nothing. He was watching the minute hand tick toward 5 past. Some part of him knew the pattern had changed because the room's air changed. A door opened to the stairwell with a bump. A man walked in wearing a cheap black raincoat and a hat that wanted very much to be Victorian. He had stubble like a week of excuses, and the kind of eyes that tried on danger for size. "Evening," he said to the DJ, ignoring the detectives as if they were aging furniture. "I'm here for the Lamplighter slot tomorrow. I go by the name on the streets." He tipped his hat an inch. Lamplighter. Malik showed her warrant card so gently it felt like an apology. "Is that so?" He shrugged, careless, playing to a crowd that wasn't here. "Somebody's got to own the minute. I'm not scared of ghosts. It's art, innit?" "You're a brave man," Miles said, not as a compliment. The man delivered a monologue about free speech and fear, and the right to shout across roofs. He wanted to be arrested. It would have meant the persona had a face. Malik didn't give him the photograph he wanted. She took his name, tie, and the address he said he slept at, which was almost certainly a lie. He left in a swing of cheap aftershave that pretended to be cedar. They tailed him at a quiet distance through back streets slick as eels. He moved with the swagger of a decoy. He looked over his shoulder exactly the right number of times to be seen. At the edge of a council estate, he cut between blocks and vanished into the stairwell's throat. "Leave him?" Malik asked, judging the time they didn't have. "Leave him," Miles said. "If he's the mask and not the man, he's bait. Whoever's running this will let him pretend until he's useful." By 2 the estate had swallowed Ty. At 04 Fusliks, a patrol car called in a disturbance half a mile away. A crash in a service alley behind a closed chippy. A bin knocked from its bolts. The responding officers found Ty sprawled under a dead lamp, mouth taped shut with gaffer, wrists bound not with rope, but with neatly twisted lengths of coaxial cable. The lamplighter of matches at his feet was inaccurate. The stickman's pole was upside down, as if someone had copied the idea without understanding it. Malik stood over the body, breath fogging. She was very still, which meant the fury had gone subterranean. "Someone let him put on the mask," she said, then took it back. Miles crouched. The tape over Ty's mouth had been cut with a neat tool, the ends squared off rather than torn, as if an engineer had handled it. In the dead man's pocket, a folded card, a typed timetable with columns labeled "Midnight Windows" and "Silence." At the bottom, faint carbon from a previous slip bled through, "Observatory, Rao." He turned the card toward the light. The letters had the crisp, thrown-hammer impression of a good typewriter. The ribbon had been recently replaced. An academic's machine, perhaps. A lecturer's office. or a hobbyist's study, where silence belonged to no one but the clocks. Back at the station, they ran Ty's prints and got a scatter of petty charges and a short stint for theft. No radio parts in his flat, no crystals, no one-time pads, just flyers and bravado and hunger. "The persona is a system," Miles said in the conference room, map still huddled under acetate. "A ritual anyone can wear for a night. The author keeps the script." Malik turned the typed timetable with 2 fingers, as if it were a beetle that might yet scuttle. "The Carbon shows observatory. Could be any. But this poet keeps talking about timekeepers." "Greenwich," Miles said. He felt the city lean east in his head, the meridian like an invisible hinge, the way school trips had lined up to see a line inlaid in the ground and call it necessary. If he wants a stage, he'll want the one where time is kept. "And if we show up with every uniform in London and get it wrong?" Malik asked. "He'll move the minute and kill in a shadow we're not watching." Miles looked down at the typed columns again. Midnight windows, silence. And in pencil at the top a small, neat notation, TQ 388 772. He reached for the AZ. Elsie had left her copy on the table, bristling with post-its. He found TQ 388 772. The grid square held Greenwich Park. "Then we make the meridian ours," he said, "and we keep him from lighting anything at all." Chapter 8. Ultimatum on Air. The city reacted to the idea of Greenwich like a body to a remembered injury. Patrol patterns shifted east. Malik built a plan that gave the appearance of randomness and the heart of a trap. Elsie set up in a borrowed council van with a scanner, a clamp meter, and the kind of tea that made decisions sound reasonable. Colin Price called just after lunch, voice turned thin by decision. "They came by," he said. "Not the rig boys, the other lot. They want me to courier a tape to a Lewisham station for midnight. If I say no, they mention my little brother by his whole name and the school he goes to." "Tell them yes," Malik said, already tapping a pencil into a time grid. "We'll walk behind your shadow." Colin arrived at the station doors at 17 Sachs, wearing a jacket that wasn't warm enough and a look that wanted to leave his face. He handed over the jiffy bag as if it were a live thing. Miles slit it with a letter opener. Inside, a TDK with the familiar 0000 scrawl, and a typed sheet with instructions precise enough to be architectural. At the bottom, in faint carbon ghost's veil, then a line crossed through, the ghost of a name erased on the slip above. He felt the tilt again, the small, steady gravity of a suspicion that did not yet ask for handcuffs. "Walk us through the route," he said to Colin. "Slowly, markets, crossings, people you'll nod to without thinking." Colin did, and they rehearsed the courier run until his feet knew it without a brain. They gave him a bag with a duplicate cassette and a mic pinned inside the lining. They salted the street with officers who looked like men admiring shop windows. Elsie's van purred south with them like a benevolent shark. At 23:30, a hijacked minute popped early out in Barking. A block of flats no one had on the board. A woman's voice counted through groups that bent subtly against their accustomed rhythm, as if the ritual had grown impatient with itself. The coda was as cold as tin. "Meridian, midnight, all lamps to 0. Ultimatum," Elsie said, voice quiet on the van radio. "He's telling us the stage is dressed." Colin moved toward Lewisham with the practiced aimlessness of a man who keeps himself unremarkable for a living. Twice a kid on a BMX glided too near. Twice Malik's shadow moved just enough to keep distance without teaching a lesson. Outside the station door, a man in a cap touched his nose. Colin touched his elbow prearranged code to say the air behind him was alive and handed over the bag. The cap man weighed it, nodded at nothing, and lifted the flap. His hand hesitated on the tape label, then tucked the cassette inside his jacket. He turned, not toward the station, but toward a cut-through to a back mews. Malik's team flowed after him like water deciding the shape of a glass. At the mews, the man with the cap passed the cassette to a second man who had a courier's legs and a kid's face. The handoff had been designed to look like part of the architecture. Miles saw the second man's mouth form Prince of Wales Road. A reflex. An error. He broke cover long enough to step into the man's path. "Evening," he said. The kid startled as if he'd been woken, and bolted. He made it 10 paces before a plainclothes officer hooked him in a firm, apologetic tackle that turned both of them into a tangle of limbs and thanks. The cassette cracked open in the scuffle. Inside the case, taped under the inlay card, sat a folded strip of thin paper. Miles peeled it free. Micro-printed in tiny squares like a newspaper for ants. TQ references and dates. The same February 1991 sequence they'd lifted from the AZ microdots. At the end, smaller than sense required, 3 words, prime meridian. "Witnesses." "Witnesses," Malik said. "He wants an audience, or he wants the people he's arguing with to be present while he wins." She made calls that would look like favors, rather than operations. By midnight, the park was shut without making a noise about it. Security at the observatory was briefed with a story about copper thieves and lightning rods. They posted pairs along the avenues like commas you don't notice until a sentence goes wrong. Elsie checked signal strength, chewing the end of a pencil and cursing at the weather with affection. "Where's our poet?" Malik asked. "Close," Elsie said. "The lamplighter needs his flame to be seen." Miles felt the tug of the meridian in his belly, the way you feel a boat tie off. He thought of Dr. Adrian Vale in his office with the river light, the way he'd said delicious like a man given permission to touch the cake. He thought of the receipt spike, for Valehold, and told his thoughts to wait their turn. At 23:59:58, the park held its breath. The city around it did not. Just beyond, traffic shuffled along the Blackwall Tunnel approach like people trying to remember a dance. The minute would be theirs or it wouldn't. Either way, the stage was set. Chapter 9, Through the Tunnel. The voice did not take the observatory first. It took the tunnel. At midnight +20, while Pears paced the meridian and Malik kept her radio on a wire-tight lead, Elsie hissed into the van mic. "Picking up a feeder east. Very strong coming off the river. Not a pirate set. A clean studio feed." Miles was already moving. He cut down the park's slope with a runner's care, boots catching on wet roots, and reached the railings overlooking the river road. Beyond, the black mouth of the Greenwich Foot Tunnel building yawned like a municipal secret. Its lamps were on a timer and out of step. 2 glowed, 2 slept, 1 flickered in a stubborn argument with electricity. "Where?" Malik asked, swinging the car round. "Pump house," Miles said, "or a lockup near it. He rides the minute on a clean line, then launches the rooftop jumper as a flourish." They found the side door on the pump house annex, unlatched by a discipline that had been practiced until it looked like forgetfulness. Inside, a corridor was lit by fluorescent tubes that gave everything a sickly agency. At the end, a room had been dressed in quiet. A folding table, a borrowed studio mixer, a reel-to-reel deck spooling the woman's voice into a radio's thin throat. The minute had already gone. The tape ran tail. On a second table sat a grey metal index box. Miles flipped it open and found rows of typed cards in a librarian's hand. 000. Hijack windows. Preferred roofs. Deptford. Lambeth. Isle of Dogs. On each card, penciled notations, wind speeds, line-of-sight notes, the habits of caretakers on particular estates. "Order," Malik murmured. "He loves order." Next to the box, a stack of recent posts sat like an afterthought. Lamination pouches, carbon ribbons for a typewriter, a receipt for Adrian Vale Consulting, billing a borough council for advice on signage compliance in derelict sites being converted to flats. Miles let the name sit on the table. He didn't invite the cuffs, he wanted the echoes. He traced the cokes running out the window to an aerial mounted on a drain pipe, a crisp, competent job. He checked the hatch to the roof not warm, not recently handled. The studio was the heart. The roof was merely a chimney. Malik's phone rang. A constable at the park gates reported a man asking, with plausible concern, whether the observatory was open late for a private event. He carried a satchel and a teacher's good posture. He sounded like a person you'd want to agree with to improve your own self-esteem. "Vale," Malik said, and the name didn't fill the room so much as fit it. "He had the inquest filings, he has the typewriter. He knows the hour, and he wrote us notes on how to think about it." Miles was already moving again back up the hill, lungs biting, the city grinding its teeth on the Blackwall's traffic. He pictured Vale's dry hand and the hole at his cuff, and felt not triumph. Something quieter, a sadness that didn't forgive anything. Near the observatory wall they passed a maintenance gate kept shut by an old chain that had suffered a recent indignity and hidden it well. The fence beyond showed a man's width bent by someone who had climbed often enough to make the mesh remember. They cut back to the main gate, took the proper keys from a guard who had been told to treat them like a necessary fiction, and entered the grounds with the care of people walking into a room that would forgive no loudness. The observatory at night looked like a painting hung badly, the way darkness eats edges and leaves intentions. The red ball on the roof was still, suspended midday. The meridian line inset in the paving waited for shoes to make a ritual out of walking. Nearby, a dead lamp wore a plastic bag over its head like a prank that had got bored and stayed. Elsie's van pulled up beyond the railings. She was rolling cable by hand, mouth set, listening to the air as if it were a radio you could put to your ear and trust. "We can jam his minute," she said, "or we can reverse it." "Reverse?" Malik asked. "Turn his transmitter into a receiver long enough to feed him himself," Elsie said. "Give him the taste of echo, but you need to be very, very close." Miles looked at the dead lamp with its plastic hood, the way a lamplighter might have problems no ritual would solve. He thought of the typed cards and the microdots, of dates pinned to a February that wasn't letting go. He thought of 4 dead at South Dock, and men arguing about light. "Let's be close," he said. They ghosted the path to the prime meridian like nervous thieves. The city below breathed a composite breath. Somewhere in it, a man who loved order was choosing a word to go with midnight. Chapter 10, Meridian Reckoning. They saw him first as a silhouette against the lit window of the Time Ball Tower. A neat figure, a satchel strap diagonal across his coat, a man entirely at ease with the idea that life could be arranged. Dr. Adrian Vale stepped from the shadow of the building and looked with unfeigned pleasure at the line inlaid in the paving. "Mr. Harrington," he said, as if they'd agreed to meet for a coffee. "Inspector Malik, I did wonder whether your map would bring you here tonight." Malik's voice, when it came, had the cool of steel left on a windowsill in winter. "Hands where I can see them, Doctor." He lifted them, courteous. No bravado. The satchel hung obediently. Over Malik's shoulder, Elsie crouched behind a low wall with a coil of cokes and a homemade interface that had no right to work, and would because she loved it. "You advised the South Dock inquest," Miles said. "Your recommendations on exits and extinguishers were excised in the final report. By men who loved crowd and profit more than light," Vale said, not heated, disappointed, perhaps, that a test had been failed. 4 young people died on a floor that should never have existed. I wrote a paper about how cities keep time with themselves through ritual and safety. Nobody read it. "So you decided to write across the city instead," Miles said. The wind flexed, moved a tree's branches like a hand feeling for a lost pocket. "A minute at midnight on other men's frequencies. Staged bodies under dead lamps." Vale's expression barely changed. "Bodies create understanding. That's what you do, isn't it? You arrange the story of a body to make the city pay attention." Malik took a step closer, slow, one hand out in a placatory wound-up gesture that would end as cuffs. "Who else is in this with you?" "No one," Vale said, and Miles believed that he believed it. "A persona is a system. A system only requires an author. I borrowed a radio minute because it suited the poem. I borrowed men who touched light because the city needed to see what happens when its extinguishers are not lit." "Ty wore your mask," Malik said. "You killed him to keep the stage." "Ty tried to improvise," Vale said. a speck of disdain arriving like dust. He thought Art was shouting. Elsie's whisper in Miles's ear came courtesy of the smallest in-ear he'd tolerated in years. "When you like," she breathed. "I can make his transmitter swallow its own tail." Miles nodded, almost imperceptible. He took a step that put him on the meridian line, an indulgence he hadn't planned, and felt stupidly the child he must have been on a school trip, obedient to the idea of lines. "The numbers," he said. "You chose 5-figure groups because spies love them, but your pads weren't real pads. You allowed patterns to leak, or you wanted them to. The Ordnance Survey references in the microdots, the AZ'd. You wanted someone to map your grievance." Vale smiled with genuine approval. "What's the point of an argument if your opponent can't hear it? I left you breadcrumbs. You have been, if you'll forgive me, the ideal adversary hard of hearing where pride would have deafened a lesser man. And your inspector? She attends to process. I like process." Malik's hand now. "Satchel, Doctor, slowly." He unbuckled the strap with 2 fingers, set the bag on the ground and opened the flap like a magician concealing a trick. Inside, a compact VHF rig, a cassette deck pre-cued to 00, a typewritten sheet of tonight's instructions for a station that would never play them because he'd taken the feed himself. Elsie's pencil scratched approval somewhere out of sight. Her coil snake moved. "You know," Vale said to Miles, "when you sat in my office and watched the river light, I thought, here is a man who understands that ritual is a kind of equation. You arrange steps, you get a result. Tonight's result is a final ceremony. 1 minute, spoken clearly, to call the city to witness the negligence it breeds." "By killing another man?" Malik asked, calm iron. "By placing him where light is absent," Vale said, "so the absence can be seen. After this, the persona retires. The poem will have been adequately performed." He reached as if he owned movement toward the deck. Malik's no and the movement of her hand arrived in the same breath as Elsie's whispered now, and the quiet flick of a switch. The little rig in the satchel hummed and very softly clicked. Its guts shivered. Vale looked down, curious, like a scientist hearing a mouse in a wall. From the satchel a woman's voice rose, the exact minute he'd planned to send outward, but now it came back in, flooding his headphones, his mixer, his skull. 43982. He blinked, surprised, then delighted. "Oh," he said, "elegant." "Stay with us, Doctor," Malik said. And she was on him before the applause could happen, hands cleaning his wrists of agency, radioed words becoming the air. He didn't fight. It wasn't that kind of man. He looked at Miles as if the conversation had gone precisely as theory predicted. "They wouldn't read," he said, a last statement he considered explanatory. "So I wrote in light." They walked him across the meridian. Somewhere down the hill, the city kept breathing without permission. Elsie coiled cable with the satisfied air of a gardener who has pruned the right branch. On the paving by the dead lamp, someone had meant to lay matches. A small box sat unopened, damp cardboard gone soft. Vale had brought the ritual, even if he hadn't had time to put it down. In the satchel beneath the rig, Miles found a folder. Inside, copies of his 1991 testimony pages circled, margins annotated in a tidy hand. Photocopies of safety memos where he'd warned, underlined. Extinguishers to be checked monthly, not quarterly. Emergency lighting to be maintained. Newspaper clippings of the warehouse dead. No photographs of family. No friends. A city and argument. Later, when the paperwork yawned, Malik said not unkindly, "If we hadn't jammed him." "He would have had a minute," Miles said. "We would have had a body. The city would have had a poem it didn't want to read." He stood a moment with the line under his feet and the unlit lamp beside him, and listened to the Thames grind east as if time were a physical act. Downslope, the park lamps kept their schedules. Up here, a dead one wore its bag, unbothered by metaphor. "Let's go write the kind of paperwork that keeps other men from thinking ritual requires blood," he said. Malik's mouth turned in what on another night might have been a smile. "Timekeepers," she said, a private echo of the voice. "Stand down." The city changed stations again the minute passed. The air for once stayed empty. End of chapter and end of story. Please like and subscribe to support our channel, and to listen to more murder mysteries and investigative stories.